He inherited a ranch and found 7 widows waiting with his photograph. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Jake Miller's hands shook as he read it 3 times. His uncle Vernon was dead, and somehow Jake had inherited the Broken Arrow Ranch in Montana. He'd never met Vernon, never even knew the man existed until a lawyer's name appeared at the bottom of the yellow paper. 24 hours later, Jake stepped off the train in Copper Springs with nothing but a worn suitcase and questions nobody seemed willing to answer. The ranch sat 15 miles outside town, and the driver who took him there kept glancing at Jake's face in the rearview mirror like he was looking at a ghost. When they pulled up to the main house, 7 women stood on the porch in black dresses. 7 widows, all around 30 to 40 years old, all staring at Jake with expressions that mixed hope and horror in equal measure. The oldest one, a blonde named Margaret, stepped forward first. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wild. "You're really him. You're really Jake Miller. I inherited this place from Vernon Miller. I'm his nephew." Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. She turned it toward Jake, and his blood went cold. It was him. His exact face, his exact build, down to the small scar above his left eyebrow. But the man in the photo wore clothes from 20 years ago and stood beside a woman Jake had never seen before. "That's my husband, Carl," Margaret said. "He died 6 months ago, fell from his horse and broke his neck." Another woman stepped forward, dark-haired and trembling. "I'm Linda. This is my husband, Peter." She showed Jake another photograph. Same face, same scar, different clothes, different woman beside him. One by one, all 7 widows showed Jake photographs of their dead husbands. Every single man had Jake's face. Every single one had died in the past 8 months. Horse accidents, drowning, a barn fire, a shooting that was ruled self-defense, a heart attack, a fall down the stairs, and one who simply disappeared and was declared dead after 3 months. Jake's throat closed up. "This is impossible. These men, they can't all look like me. People don't just—" "Your Uncle Vernon knew," Margaret interrupted. "He found them. He brought them here. He gave each of them jobs on this ranch, gave them lives. And then they started dying." The youngest widow, a redhead named Claire, spoke up from the back. "Vernon died last. He was the last one who looked like you. Like all of you. And now you're here." Jake dropped his suitcase. "I'm leaving. I'm getting back in that car, and I'm leaving right now." But when he turned around, the car was already gone. Dust still hung in the air from its departure. The nearest town was 15 miles through rough country, and the sun was already starting to set. "You can't leave," Margaret said. None of them could leave either. "Something about this place, about this ranch. It holds men like you." Vernon tried to warn the others, tried to help them escape, but the ranch always found a way to keep them here. Jake looked at the 7 women, at their desperate faces, at the photographs they still clutched in their hands. Then he looked at the sprawling ranch around him, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the shadows growing longer across the yard. "What happened to them?" Jake asked quietly. "What really happened to your husbands?" The women exchanged glances. Finally, Linda spoke. "We don't know, but we think the ranch does, and we think it's hungry again." Part 2, Jake didn't sleep that first night. Margaret had shown him to Vernon's old room in the main house, but he couldn't bring himself to lie down in the bed. Instead, he sat in a chair by the window, watching the moonlight paint silver across the ranch yard. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made his heart race. At dawn, he searched the house. Vernon's office was on the first floor, and Jake tore through every drawer, every file cabinet, every box he could find. Most of it was routine ranch business, bills and receipts, and livestock records. But in the bottom drawer of Vernon's desk, hidden under a false panel, Jake found a leather journal. The first entry was dated 23 years ago. Vernon's handwriting was shaky, uncertain. "I found the first one today. His name was Daniel Price. He was standing in the north pasture, and when I rode up to him, I thought I was looking in a mirror. Same face, same build, same scar. He said he'd been wandering for days, couldn't remember where he came from or why he was here. I gave him a job. God forgive me, I gave him a job." Vernon had documented everything. Daniel Price worked the ranch for 2 years before he met Margaret. They married quickly. Vernon wrote about how happy they seemed, how Daniel had found purpose. Then, 3 months after the wedding, Daniel fell from the barn loft and broke his spine. He died 2 days later. "I found the second one a week after Daniel's funeral," Vernon wrote. "His name was Carl Bennett. Same face, same scar. He didn't remember anything either. I should have sent him away." I should have warned him, but Margaret was grieving, and when she saw Carl, something in her eyes changed. Hope, maybe, or madness. I introduced them at Sunday dinner. The pattern repeated through the journal. Vernon would find a man who looked exactly like him, exactly like Jake, wandering somewhere on the ranch property. The man would have no memory of his past, no idea how he got there. Vernon would give him work, give him a place to stay, and eventually the man would meet one of the women. They would fall in love quickly, desperately, like they were trying to recapture something they'd lost. Then, within a year, the man would die. Jake's hand shook as he read the final entry, dated 3 weeks before Vernon's death. I figured it out. The ranch is alive. I don't know what it is or why it does this, but it's alive, and it's feeding on us. On men who look like me, like us. I thought I could save the new ones by keeping them here, by warning them, but that only made it worse. The ranch doesn't like it when we try to leave. It takes us faster, more violently. I tried to burn it down last week. The fire wouldn't catch. I tried to poison the well. The water stayed pure. I'm trapped here, and I've trapped all the others. Jake, if you're reading this, if somehow you inherited this place, run. Run now and don't look back. Don't trust the women. Don't trust the land. Don't trust anything. Jake slammed the journal shut and stood up so fast his chair fell over. He needed to leave immediately. But when he looked out the window, all 7 widows were standing in the yard, forming a semicircle around the house. They weren't moving, just standing there watching the window where Jake stood. He grabbed his suitcase and ran for the back door. It wouldn't open. He tried the front door. Locked from the outside. Every window was sealed shut, the latches rusted in place like they hadn't been opened in decades. Jake pounded on the glass, shouted for help, but the women just stood there, silent and still. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Jake searched every room looking for another way out. In the attic he found boxes of photographs. Hundreds of them. Men who all had his face, standing with women, standing with children, standing alone on the ranch. Some of the photos were old, yellowed with age. The oldest ones looked like they were from the 1800s. The same face, over and over, spanning more than a century. At noon, the front door clicked open. Jake ran downstairs and found Margaret standing in the entrance hall. She was alone. She looked tired, sad, but not surprised. "You read Vernon's journal," she said. It wasn't a question. "Let me go. Just let me walk out of here. None of us can. We're as trapped as you are. Then leave with me, all of you." Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We've tried. Linda made it 2 miles before her car stopped. The engine just died. Claire tried to walk to town last year. She was gone for 6 hours, but when we found her, she was standing in the north pasture, right where she'd started. Said she'd been walking in a straight line the whole time." Jake pushed past her and ran out the front door. The other widows didn't try to stop him. He ran for the main road, his feet pounding the dirt, his lungs burning. The fence line was a mile away. He could see it, could see the gate. Freedom was right there. But the distance never closed. He ran for an hour, ran until his legs gave out and he collapsed in the dirt. When he looked back, the main house was still exactly the same distance behind him. When he looked forward, the gate was still exactly the same distance ahead. He'd been running in place, going nowhere. When he finally gave up and walked back, the sun was setting. The widows were waiting on the porch. They helped him inside, gave him water, didn't say a word about what had happened. They didn't need to. They'd all seen it before. That night, Jake sat at the dinner table with all 7 women. They ate in silence until Claire finally spoke. Vernon tried to figure out what the ranch wants. He thought maybe if he could give it what it needed, it would let us go. "What does it want?" Jake asked.
The women looked at each other.
Finally, Margaret answered. "We don't know, but we think it has something to do with love. With marriage. Every man who came here fell in love with one of us. And every man who fell in love died." Jake stared at his plate. "Then I won't fall in love. I'll stay here. Work the ranch, but I won't get close to any of you. Problem solved." Linda shook her head. Vernon tried that too. Lasted about 3 months before he met Patricia. They were married within a year. She's buried on the hill with all the others. "How many?" Jake asked. "How many are buried up there?" 43, Margaret said quietly. "We counted last spring. 43 men, going back almost 150 years. All with the same face." Part 3, Jake spent the next 3 days avoiding the widows and searching for answers. The ranch had a library in the west wing, and he found land deeds going back to 1876. The original owner was a man named Jacob Milford, and the portrait hanging above the fireplace could have been Jake's twin. Same face, same scar, same eyes that seemed to know more than they should. According to the records, Jacob Milford had won the land in a poker game from a Native American chief named Running Bear. But there was a notation in the margin, written in different ink. Cursed ground, blood price unpaid. 7 daughters waiting. Jake photographed the document with his phone, but when he looked at the screen, the image was corrupted, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. He tried again. Same result. The ranch didn't want him documenting anything. On the 4th morning, Jake woke to find a woman sitting in the chair by his window. She wasn't one of the 7 widows. She was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and eyes that reflected the dawn light strangely. "You're wondering why," she said before Jake could speak. "You're wondering what you did to deserve this." Jake sat up slowly. "Who are you?" "My name was Running Bear's wife. Is Running Bear's wife. Time works differently here. I've been dead for 140 years, but I'm also still alive, still waiting." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. "My husband had 7 daughters. Beautiful girls, all of them. Jacob Milford came to our land asking for water, for food, for shelter. We gave him everything. He repaid us by seducing our daughters, one by one, promising each of them marriage. When the 7th one told him she was carrying his child, he laughed. Said he'd never marry a savage. Said they were just entertainment." Jake's stomach turned. "What happened?" "My husband challenged him to the poker game. If Jacob won, he'd get the land and never return. If my husband won, Jacob would marry all 7 daughters and care for them the rest of his life." Jacob cheated. "He won with a marked deck, took the land deed, and rode away that same night. And the daughters?" The old woman's eyes filled with tears that glowed like embers. "They hanged themselves from 7 trees on this land, all on the same night, all within an hour of each other. My husband found them at dawn. The grief killed him by sunset, and I cursed this place with my dying breath. I told the land to take from Jacob Milford what he'd taken from us. I told it to take love, to take hope, to take every man who wore his face for 7 generations of 7. Jake did the math in his head. 7 generations of 7 would be 49 men. 43 were already buried on the hill. I'm number 44. Yes, and there will be 5 more after you. Then the curse will be complete and the land will be free." The woman moved toward the door, her form becoming more transparent with each step. "The widows don't know the full truth. They think they're victims, but they're part of the curse. They're the daughters, reborn over and over, forced to love you and lose you until the debt is paid." "Wait," Jake called out. "How do I break it? There has to be a way." She paused at the threshold. "There is. But Vernon couldn't do it. None of the others could either. The price is too high." Then she was gone, and Jake was alone again. He spent that day watching the widows work. Margaret tended the garden. Linda repaired fences. Claire worked with the horses. They moved through their tasks with practiced efficiency, but there was something mechanical about it, like they were following a script they'd performed 1,000 times before. That night, Jake called them all together in the main hall. "I know about the curse. I know about Jacob Milford and the 7 daughters. I know what you are." Margaret dropped the cup she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. "You remember," Linda whispered. "None of the others ever remembered." "I didn't remember. A woman told me, Running Bear's wife. She came to my room. Claire's face went pale. She never comes to the men. She only comes at the end, when it's almost over. Why would she come to you now? She said there's a way to break the curse. She said the price is too high, but she didn't tell me what it is." Jake looked at each woman in turn. "Do you know? Do you remember being the daughters?" Slowly, Margaret nodded. "Sometimes. In dreams. We remember hanging from the trees. We remember the pain, the betrayal, the moment we realized he'd never loved any of us. And then we wake up here, in these bodies with these lives, and we fall in love again, and we watch you die again, and it starts over." "How many times?" Jake asked. "How many times have you lived through this?" I don't know," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "Dozens? Hundreds?" After a while, the lives blur together. "We're not even sure which memories are real anymore." Jake paced the room thinking. The woman said the price is too high. What could be higher than death? What could be worse than this cycle? One of the quieter widows, a brunette named Helen, spoke up. What if the price isn't death? What if it's life? What if someone has to choose to stay here forever, fully aware, never dying, never forgetting, holding the curse in place so everyone else can go free? The room went silent. Jake stopped pacing. Vernon tried that. He stayed, he remembered, he documented everything. It didn't work. Because he didn't choose it, Helen said. He was trapped. There's a difference between being caged and walking into the cage yourself. Between being forced and volunteering. What if someone has to love this place, love us, and choose to stay anyway? Knowing they'll watch us die over and over, knowing they'll be alone forever? Jake's heart raced. That's insane. Nobody would choose that. Jacob Milford should have, Margaret said quietly. He should have chosen to love the daughters he seduced. He should have chosen to stay, to be a father, to be a husband. His refusal to choose love is what created this curse. Maybe the only way to break it is for someone to make the choice he should have made. Jake walked to the window and looked out at the dark ranch. Somewhere out there, 7 trees stood in a circle, their branches still bearing the weight of an old tragedy. Somewhere beneath the soil, 43 men with his face were buried, all of them trying to escape, all of them failing. He thought about the 5 men who would come after him if he didn't break this. 5 more versions of himself, 5 more lives cut short, 5 more cycles of false love and real death. If I choose to stay, Jake said slowly, if I choose to love this place and accept the curse, what happens to all of you? The widows looked at each other. Finally, Claire spoke. We think we'd be free. We think we'd remember everything, all the lives, all the pain, but we'd be released. We could leave, start over, maybe even die naturally when our time comes. And I'd stay here alone. Forever, Margaret confirmed, aware, remembering, waiting. The ranch would still be cursed, but the curse would have a willing host. It wouldn't need to feed anymore. Jake turned from the window. How do you know this will work? What if I choose to stay and nothing changes? We don't know, Linda admitted. It's just a theory. Vernon wrote about it in a journal we found after he died. He thought he'd figured it out, but he died before he could test it. Before he could make a real choice, Part 4 Jake didn't give them an answer that night. Instead, he asked for time to think, and the widows granted it. They left him alone in the main hall while they retreated to their separate rooms in the guest houses scattered across the property. For 3 days, Jake lived in a strange limbo. He worked the ranch, repaired fences, fed animals, went through the motions of normal life while his mind wrestled with an impossible choice. The widows watched him from a distance, never pressing, never demanding, just waiting. On the 4th day, Jake rode out to the circle of 7 trees. They stood in the north pasture, ancient and twisted, their bark scarred with old marks. When he got close, he could hear whispers in the wind, voices speaking in a language he shouldn't understand, but somehow did. The daughters were still there, still hanging in some version of reality that overlapped with this one.
He dismounted and walked to the center of the circle.
The ground felt different here, charged with energy that made his skin prickle. I want to talk to you, he said to the empty air. I want to understand. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. Then, one by one, 7 young women appeared around him. They weren't solid, more like projections, but their faces were clear enough. He recognized them immediately. They had the same features as the widows, but younger, unmarked by time and suffering. The tallest one spoke first. You're different from the others. You see us. Running Bear's wife helped me, Jake said. She told me about the curse, about Jacob Milford. Our father in spirit, another daughter said bitterly. The man who promised us everything and gave us nothing but shame. Jake sat down in the grass, and the 7 spirits sat with him, forming the same circle they'd formed when they died. I'm sorry for what he did to you. I'm sorry he wore my face. You're not him, the youngest daughter said. She looked barely 16. We know that now. We've watched 43 men die wearing his face, and none of them were him. None of them deserved what we did. The curse wasn't meant for you, the tallest daughter continued. It was meant for him, for Jacob, but he died in a gunfight 6 months after he took our land. He never came back here, never felt a moment of the suffering we created. Instead, it's fallen on innocent men who just happened to share his bloodline, his appearance. So why don't you stop it, Jake asked. Why don't you end the curse? We can't, the youngest daughter whispered. We died in anger and pain. Our deaths fed the land, gave it power, gave it hunger. Even if we wanted to stop it now, we don't have that authority anymore. The land owns the curse. We're just the reason it started. Jake looked at each of them in turn. Helen thinks someone has to choose to stay, choose to accept the curse willingly. Would that work? The daughters were quiet for a long moment. Finally, the middle one spoke. Maybe. We don't know. The curse was born from a refusal to choose love. Jacob Milford refused to choose us, refused to accept responsibility for what he'd done. If someone chose differently, chose to embrace what he rejected, it might satisfy the debt. The land might release its hold, but you're not sure. No. We've been dead for 140 years, and we still don't understand everything that happened. We just know the pain continues, and we can't stop it. Jake stood up. The spirit stood with him. If I choose to stay, if I make that choice freely and with full knowledge of what it means, will you be free? Will you finally be able to rest? The tallest daughter reached out as if to touch Jake's face, but her hand passed through him like smoke. We think so. We hope so. But even if it doesn't work, even if the curse continues, at least you'll have chosen love instead of running from it. That has to count for something. Jake rode back to the main house as the sun was setting. The widows were waiting on the porch again, just like they had been the day he arrived, but this time their faces showed something different. Not hope exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance. They knew what he was going to ask them. I need to know, Jake said as he dismounted. If I stay, if I choose this, will you leave? Will you actually go, or will you be trapped here with me? Margaret stepped forward. Vernon's journal had instructions. If someone makes the choice willingly, at the center of the 7 trees during a full moon and speaks the words of binding, the curse transfers completely to them. Everyone else is released. We'd be free to leave that same night, and I'd stay here forever. Yes, aware, alive, immortal in the worst way. You'd maintain the ranch, keep it running, and wait. The land would stop hunting for men with your face because it would have you already. You'd be the final payment. Jake looked up at the sky. The moon was 3/4 full, waxing toward completion. When's the next full moon? 3 days, Linda said quietly. 3 days to decide if he was willing to sacrifice eternity for 7 women he barely knew and 5 men he'd never meet. 3 days to choose between running and staying, between selfishness and love. That night, Jake dreamed of all 43 men who died before him. They stood in a line, each one identical, each one showing the wounds that killed them. Broken necks, drowning blue faces, burns, bullet holes, bruises from falls. They didn't speak, just watched him with eyes that begged him to end it. When he woke, his decision was made. He spent the next 3 days putting the ranch in order. He repaired every broken fence, cleaned every stall, inventoried every supply. The widows worked beside him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, they seemed almost peaceful. There was no pretending anymore, no false romance, no forced connection. Just 7 women and 1 man, working together, preparing for an ending. On the morning of the full moon, Claire approached Jake while he was fixing the gate to the south pasture. You don't have to do this, she said. We've lived this curse for lifetimes. We can live it for more. You don't owe us your eternity. Jake set down his hammer. Yes, I do. Not because I'm responsible for what Jacob Milford did, but because I can end it, and that makes it my responsibility. 5 more men would come after me. 5 more versions of myself would die here. I can save them. I can save you. That's worth the price. You barely know us. You don't love us. How can you sacrifice everything for people you don't love? Jake smiled sadly. Maybe that's the point. Jacob Milford only thought about himself, about what he wanted. I'm choosing to think about others. That's the difference. That's what breaks the curse. That evening, as the sun set and the full moon rose, Jake walked to the circle of 7 trees. The widows followed at a distance, carrying lanterns, their black dresses blowing in the wind. They formed a larger circle around the trees, witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Jake stood in the center, the same spot where the daughters had died. He could feel them there, their spirits pressing close, waiting. The ground beneath his feet hummed with ancient power. He pulled out Vernon's journal, opened to the last page where the words of binding were written. Vernon had translated them from the original curse, found in papers left by Running Bear's wife. Jake had practiced them for 3 days, making sure he got every syllable right. Part 5. The moon reached its peak, full and bright, turning the ranch silver. Jake took a deep breath and began to speak the words of binding. They were in a language he didn't know, but his mouth formed them perfectly, like his tongue remembered something his mind had forgotten. As he spoke, the ground began to shake. Not violently, but rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The 7 trees lit up from within, their bark glowing with pale green light. The spirits of the daughters became visible to everyone, not just Jake. The widows gasped, seeing for the first time the girls they had been, the girls whose pain they'd carried for over a century. Jake continued the words, feeling power flow through him and into the earth. The ranch was listening, tasting his intention, testing his resolve. He felt it probe his mind, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was a trick or a trap. But Jake had none. His choice was real, made with full knowledge and acceptance. The final words left his mouth and the world went still. The shaking stopped. The glow faded. For a moment, nothing happened, and Jake thought it had failed. Then pain exploded through his body, doubling him over. He fell to his knees, gasping, feeling like his bones were being rewritten, his cells rearranged. The curse was transferring, settling into him, making him its permanent home. When the pain finally subsided, Jake looked up. The 7 spirits of the daughters were smiling. Not sad smiles, not bitter ones, but genuine expressions of peace. One by one they faded, their forms dissolving into light that drifted upward toward the stars. The curse that had bound them to this place for 140 years was finally letting them go. Jake stood on shaking legs and turned to face the widows. They were changing too. Their faces were smoothing out, years of supernatural aging reversing, making them look younger, more alive. The haunted look in their eyes was disappearing, replaced by clarity and awareness. Margaret was the first to speak. We remember everything now, all of it. Every life, every death, every cycle. But we're free. We can feel it. The ranch has no hold on us anymore. One by one, the widows walked up to Jake and embraced him, not with romance or obligation, but with gratitude and sorrow. They were saying goodbye to a man they'd known for less than 2 weeks, but who had given them back their lives. "You should go now," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion, "before the ranch changes its mind. Get in the cars, drive to town, and don't look back."
"What about you?" Linda asked. "Will you be okay?"
"Will you age? Will you die?" Jake shook his head. "I don't think so. The curse made me immortal. I'll stay here, keep the ranch running, make sure it stays satisfied. That's my part of the bargain." Claire wiped tears from her eyes. "We'll tell people about you."
"We'll make sure you're remembered."
"No," Jake said firmly. "Don't. Let me be forgotten. Start new lives, use new names, and forget this place ever existed. That's the only way you'll truly be free." The widows wanted to argue, but they knew he was right. They gathered their few possessions, packed them into the ranch vehicles, and one by one they drove away. Jake watched from the porch as 7 sets of taillights disappeared down the long driveway, heading toward town, toward freedom, toward futures they had been denied for more than a century. When the last car was gone, Jake walked back to the circle of trees. The spirits were gone, but he could still feel their gratitude in the air. Running Bear's wife appeared one final time, standing between 2 of the ancient trees. "You did it," she said. "You broke the cycle. The daughters are at peace, the widows are free, and the land has what it needs." "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now you keep your promise. You stay here, maintain this place, and make sure it never hungers again. The curse is satisfied, but it still exists. It lives in you now, dormant as long as you honor the choice you made. And if I try to leave, you can't. You're bound here more completely than any of the others were. But unlike them, you chose this. That makes all the difference." She began to fade. "My husband and I can rest now, too. Thank you, Jake Miller. You succeeded where Jacob Milford failed. You chose love over selfishness." Then she was gone, and Jake was truly alone. The first weeks were the hardest. Jake had to learn to run an entire ranch by himself. He woke at dawn, fed the animals, repaired fences, managed the crops. The work was endless, exhausting, but it kept his mind occupied. At night, he sat on the porch and watched the stars, feeling the weight of eternity settling on his shoulders. He didn't age. Cuts healed within hours. He never got sick. After a month, he realized he didn't even need to sleep, though he still did out of habit. The curse had made him something more than human, something that could maintain this land forever. Occasionally, visitors came, people from town looking for work, delivery drivers, government inspectors. Jake turned them all away politely, telling them the ranch was closed to outsiders. Most believed him. Those who didn't found their cars wouldn't start when they tried to leave without permission. Jake would help them get running again, and they'd drive away disturbed, but unharmed. Years passed. Jake lost count after the first decade. The ranch prospered under his care. The animals were healthy, the crops abundant, the buildings well-maintained. Sometimes he wondered if he was going crazy, if the isolation would eventually break his mind. But the land kept him sane somehow, fed him purpose along with immortality. He never saw the widows again. He hoped that meant they'd succeeded in building new lives, that they'd found happiness somewhere far from this cursed place. Sometimes he imagined them growing old naturally, having families, dying peacefully in their beds surrounded by people who loved them. The thought brought him comfort during the long, empty nights. One day, maybe 30 or 40 years after the curse transferred, a young man showed up at the ranch gate. He had Jake's face, the same scar, the same build, the same eyes. Jake's heart stopped when he saw him. Jake called out, his voice carefully neutral. The young man smiled. "I'm looking for work. Heard there might be jobs here." "There aren't. Ranch is closed. You should move on." But the young man didn't leave. He stood at the gate, looking confused. "I can't. My car won't start, and I feel like I'm supposed to be here. Like this place has been calling me." Jake walked up to the gate, studying the young man's face. The resemblance was perfect, but something was different. The eyes were clearer, more certain. There was no fog of confusion, no lost memories. This wasn't a cursed man summoned by hungry land. This was something else. "What's your name?" Jake asked. "Connor. Connor Milford. I'm trying to trace my family history. My great-great-grandfather's records said he owned land out here. I thought maybe I could find some answers. Milford." Jacob's line continued then, outside the curse. Jake felt something shift in the land beneath his feet. It was noticing Connor, tasting his bloodline, considering whether to claim him. "No," Jake said firmly, speaking to the ranch as much as to Connor. "He's not part of this. The debt is paid. You have me. That's enough." The land resisted for a moment, testing Jake's authority, but the curse recognized its willing host and backed down. Connor's car suddenly started again, the engine turning over smoothly. "You should go," Jake told Connor. "There's nothing for you here. Your ancestor did some bad things on this land, but that debt has been settled. You're free of it. Don't come back." Connor looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Jake's expression stopped him. He got in his car and drove away, and Jake watched him go with relief. The curse was truly contained now. It wouldn't reach for innocent men anymore. It had what it needed. More decades passed. The world changed around the ranch. Jake watched it happen through newspapers and the occasional television he bought from town. Technology advanced. Society shifted. But the ranch remained the same, frozen in time, a pocket of the Old West preserved by supernatural forces. Jake learned to find peace in the routine. He talked to the animals, tended the land with care, and made friends with the wind and the rain. He was lonely, yes, but loneliness was better than the alternative. Better than 43 dead men and 7 women trapped in an eternal cycle of false love and real death. On the 100th anniversary of his choice, Jake walked back to the circle of 7 trees. They were still there, still ancient, still scarred. But the whispers were gone. The air was clean, free of ghosts and grief. He sat in the center of the circle and spoke to the empty sky. "I'm still here. Still keeping my promise. Still choosing this every single day." No one answered, but Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. Approval, maybe, or just acknowledgement. The land was satisfied. The curse was contained. The sacrifice had meaning. Jake stood up and walked back to the main house. Tomorrow he'd fix the fence in the east pasture. Next week he'd rotate the cattle to new grazing land. Next month he'd harvest the hay. Next year, and the year after, and the year after that, he'd continue doing what he'd chosen to do. He'd given up everything, his future, his freedom, his chance at normal human life, but he'd saved 7 women and prevented countless more deaths. He'd chosen love. Not romantic love, but something bigger, something selfless. He'd chosen to bear the weight so others wouldn't have to. As the sun set on his 100th year at the Broken Arrow Ranch, Jake Miller sat on the porch and smiled. It was a small smile, tinged with sadness and acceptance, but genuine. He'd inherited a ranch and found 7 widows waiting with his photograph. He'd learned the truth about an ancient curse and made an impossible choice. And he'd do it all again if he had to, because some burdens are worth carrying, some sacrifices are worth making, and some choices, once made, define who you are forever. The ranch settled into darkness around him, its hunger satisfied, its curse contained, its eternal guardian watching over it with patient, immortal eyes.